Wednesday at 12 to 12:30 Eastern Time, or sign up for updates on Mike's mailing list at salessensesolutions.com. Mike appreciates you listening and wishes you good luck on your next sales call.
Well, welcome. It's Mike Krause of the Sales Sense Reality Talk Show. I'm really excited to have Mark Satterfield here today for our guest, and he's the founder and CEO of Gentle Rain Marketing. And since 1992, he has advised business owners, marketing executives, and sales leaders on how to attract consistent streams of new clients with no cold calling or hard selling. Prior to starting Gentle Rain, Mark held executive positions at Pepsi, Kraft, in addition to having served as the Director of Career Services for the Graduate School of Business at Roberts University. He began his career as an advertising copywriter, proving that it was possible to actually get a job with a degree in English. Mark is the author of 7 books, including Power Prospecting, How to Gain Access to Key Decision Makers, Unique Sales Stories, How to Get More Referrals, Differentiate Yourself from Competition, Close More Sales, and through the Power of Stories. Mark has a master's degree in psychology, which is important in sales, and an undergraduate degree in English from Washington University. For 5 years, he has been a syndicated columnist at the Atlanta Constitution and has been honored with a 2-time winning of the Dow Jones Wall Street Journal Award for Writing Excellence and the AMA Award for Excellence in Management Education. You can learn more about Mark and Gentle Rain at gentlerainmarketing.com. So without further ado, Mark, good afternoon. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Mike. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. I'm excited to learn more about you and Gentle Rain Marketing and kind of what makes you unique, and share with our listeners the importance of having that unique proposition. You bring a lot of value. I love that you had a psychology background. I always tell people, if you want to learn more on sales, become a therapist. There's no question about that. So tell the listeners a little bit more about you and Gentle Rain, and we'll take it from there.
Well, thank you, Mike. Yeah, I was someone who finished up my education with the undergraduate degree in English and the graduate degree in psychology, and literally had no idea what it was I wanted to do in life. And someone said, you could be a copywriter, and I said, hey, that sounds great. I have no idea what in the world that is. But it turned out that it was the first step in a very interesting career. I was a copywriter doing work primarily on Anheuser-Busch business, and that then led to a series of corporate positions with PepsiCo and then Kraft Foods. And in 1992, I decided to go out on my own and start my own business, and that was the founding of Gentle Rain. But it was also a very important lesson, and one that I kind of learned the hard way, and it's one that I share a lot with my clients. When I started off, Gentle Rain primarily is a marketing consulting firm and a sales training organization. And, I had heard that people in services pretty much got all of their business from referrals. So I figured, well, that was the way I was going to get my business too. So I joined a networking group here in Atlanta, and we'd meet once a month. And there were about 15, 16 people in the group. And I made a point to take out all 15 people for lunch, and I made sure that I told them, precisely what it was that I did, so they could refer me business. And after about a year, I had gotten precisely 0 referrals. And the whole thing came to a head one day when we were having our monthly meeting, and sometimes we invited guests to come in. And they invited this guy named Jim Brinkman to come in, and Jim was a marketing consultant, but I thought, hey, maybe I'll pick up a few little tips from him. And Jim came in, and he told a story about his background, and he told a story about a client who had had some success, and he told a story that kind of addressed some of the concerns and objections that clients had to hiring Jim. And at the end of his presentation, I can still remember it to this day. There was my friend Laura Smith, who sat to my left, and she said, Jim, that was a great presentation. And matter of fact, I know someone you should talk to who could really use your services. And Todd Lang, who was sitting at the end of the table, he chimed in. He said, yeah, Jim, that was a great talk. And yeah, I know someone too you should be talking to. And I'm sitting there. And I'm just thinking, what in the world is going on? I mean, I had sat down with these people. I had told these people what I did. And these referrals would have been great for me. So I called up Laura the next day, and I said, look, I need to get together with you for lunch because I'm really kind of upset. And so we got together, and I said, hey, look, Laura, I mean, you gave these referrals to Jim Brinkman after just hearing his half-hour presentation, and those referrals would have been perfect for me. And, is it that you don't like me? Is it that you don't believe me? Why is it that you didn't refer those to me? And she sat there across the table at Houston's restaurant with this look of just utter surprise. And she said, well, Mark, I'm terribly sorry. I mean, no, I think the world of you. I guess I just never really thought that you did this kind of work. I guess I just never really understood what it was that you did. And that really set me back on my heels. And I started to think, why was it that Jim got these referrals after showing up for a half hour, and Mark didn't get any referrals after a year of being with these people? And then all of a sudden, the light bulb kind of went on. And I realized that what I was doing is I was telling people about what I did, that I could do copywriting, and I could do website design, and I could do this sales training program, and I could do this, and I could do that. I was telling features and facts. And what Jim was doing is Jim was telling stories. And, I had heard, the old saying that people don't remember facts and features, people remember examples and stories. But until that moment, it never really meant anything to me. And, without trying to be over dramatic, I would have to say, at that moment, my life literally turned around because I went from having 0 referrals and, quite frankly, getting really worried about whether I was going to be able to, operate this small little business I had for any, extended period of time. I was running pretty short on cash. And I went from 0 referrals to 7 referrals a month. And, that may not sound a lot, like a lot of referrals, but when you're a solo business consultant, boy, that was a huge increase. And then it's, increased each month from that. But shifting from telling facts, telling features, to telling stories, that was something that really shifted things for me. And from there, my business really started to take off.
Interesting, Mark. You and I have the same pain. I did networking, too, for a year, and I got very frustrated with it. I had Christmas parties and lunches, and I was building all those relationships. And one day, my friend Steve told me, he goes, Mike, I don't think people know what you can do. And I had to switch my gears as well because it's so interesting when you take a step back and someone actually says, hey, I don't know what you do. And you think, it's like pounding your head against the wall, you think you're making progress. And at the end of the day, if the light bulb doesn't go off in their head, the light bulb is never going to go off in your head. You need the 2 lights to go on. So that is very interesting. So the key there is to have a unique selling story. Can you tell us a little bit more about your book there?
I'm sorry?
Can you tell us a little bit more about your book there, Unique Selling Stories?
Right. Well, this is my 7th book. It's my most recent, and it's called Unique Sales Stories: How to Get More Referrals, Differentiate Yourself from the Competition, and Close More Sales through the Power of Stories. And I'll share with listeners where they can actually go to get a free copy. But the idea on the book was I was talking with a lot of my sales leadership clients, and we were talking about the use of sales stories. And I don't know if you had a chance to look at the research study that was done by Gartner Marketing Research. There's an interesting website called salesresearchstudy.com where they did a very large study. And what they concluded in that study was that using stories was one of the most effective ways to sell. But the top performers use sales stories a lot, whereas sales professionals who weren't as successful in selling use relatively few. So the question became, why is it that some people use stories more effectively and others didn't? And it got down to two things. One was people didn't have a structure. They didn't have a process for quickly and easily creating sales stories. And second of all, they didn't prepare them in advance. And even though we probably have all told stories since, we were, just little kids, when you're in the heat of a sales situation, when there's real serious money on the line, that's not when you want to try to create a sales story from scratch. So the idea with the book was to really do two things. One was to provide people with a easy structure, and I've got 6 components to the structure, and they're fully outlined in the book. And second of all was to give people a variety of examples, templates, if you will, that they could use to formulate their own unique sales stories. Because, a lot of people come to me, and I'm sure they come to you as well, and they say, there's nothing terribly unique about what I do. I'm a financial advisor. I'm an insurance producer. I manufacture widgets. There's lots of people who are very similar to me. How do I differentiate myself? How do I establish my own unique brand? And my belief is how you really do differentiate yourself is by creating and telling those unique sales stories that you and only you can tell. And the book is really designed to walk people through a very practical process for creating those stories, and then secondly, giving them a lot of examples from a variety of different kinds of industries so they can use those, not to copy them, but to use those as a template for developing their own unique sales stories. So the book is it's a whopping 127 pages, so it's a real quick read. But I guarantee people will put it down with a good base of knowledge and some good tools that they didn't have before they started reading it.
Absolutely, and you hit home there. I was actually speaking to a client this morning, and I said, do you think your sales team has the tools? And she stated something, no. They don't have the framework to create a story. They don't have the framework to open up a call in a networking group. They don't have the framework. And so many times as managers, which she was, we assume that these people have their own unique selling story, but they really don't. So that's really nice that you've come up with a framework that sales professionals can understand and develop these stories. And it's so true. People only remember the first couple seconds and the last couple seconds and the stories you tell in a sales call. So I think that's excellent. What study was the Gartner study you mentioned?
Yeah, it was a Gartner study. I'm sorry?
Yes, can you talk a little bit more about that, Mark?
This was a study, and I think it's still ongoing. I think they've interviewed about maybe 70, 80,000 sales representatives across, I believe it's 15 different industries. And what they did was they were trying to identify what were the traits and characteristics of the most successful sales performers, and conversely, what were the traits and characteristics that were missing from those that were less successful. And the study really honed in on 3 areas. The first was active listening, which we've heard an awful lot about. Unfortunately, there's a lot of sales reps don't do a particularly good job, and I've been guilty of this in the past too, of not doing as good a job as we could in terms of actually listening and interpreting the data that we hear. So the active listening was the number one characteristic. The second characteristic that the top salespeople had was focusing on what they call emotional intelligence, or what's referred to as EI. And this meant that they were able to develop an empathy, not a sympathy, but an empathy with the problems and issues that the prospective client was facing. And then third was anecdotes and stories. And they found that the most successful salespeople used anecdotes and stories, and those that were in the lower 20% group pretty much failed to use a single story in their typical sales call. But what was really interesting about the research was that the low 20, those sales professionals who weren't particularly adept, they actually thought they used sales stories, but in fact they didn't. So there's this disconnect between what we know we should be doing, which is using sales stories to sell, and what we actually do, whereas only the top sales performers really did it. So this study, and then of course the article that Fortune magazine did back, about 8-9 years ago, where they looked at top sales performers across a variety of different industries, and what they discovered was that the most effective sales professionals sold, but they sold what they called invisibly, and by that they meant that there weren't any of those, hokey, obviously salesy kinds of techniques. No Ben Franklin close, no trial close, none of that. ABC, always be closing, Glengarry, Glen Ross stuff. None of that. But they were selling invisibly, and so the question then became, well, that sounds kind of cool, but what the heck exactly does that mean? And again, what they discovered was selling invisibly equated to using stories, and not only stories about benefits, not only stories about that would be perhaps case studies, but also stories that addressed objections and addressed concerns. And the sales professionals that really developed this full litany of sales stories were the ones that were the most effective. So there's a fair amount of research that shows that using sales stories is not something that's just nice to do, but it actually translates into superior performance in terms of sales, of actually selling more stuff to more people, which ultimately, of course, is the name of the game.
Well, absolutely. And so many times I do some coaching, and I know you do as well, is you're out on these calls and you tell people to ask the open-ended questions, listen, and sometimes, I don't know about you, Mark, but they get defensive when I'm trying to coach them, and they're like, Mike, I do that. And then sure enough, it just happened recently, someone walks in, they throw the brochure down, they don't ask any open-ended questions, and they just go right down their throat, and that's just not how sales is supposed to be. And no one wants that. No one wants the ABC or the Glengarry Glen Ross, which is, it's a great movie, and I love that movie. It's just no one wants that type of salesmanship anymore. They want the person to listen, just like what you said, listen, empathy, and tell some stories, and the most important thing, solve their problem. Solve their problem. They're in pain. They want someone to solve their problem, and they want to feel that they can trust you, and you're listening to them, and you're going through the process. I'm 100% on board with you. There's no question about that.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, it's the classic know, like, and trust. With my clients, it's all about building relationships. And, the hammering at you kind of, salesmanship. That might work if we're just selling, a little, very inexpensive product where I may just buy the thing just to get rid of you. But, it doesn't endear you to clients. It certainly doesn't do anything for repeat sales. And that's really where, these stories become powerful, because they enable, to your point, they enable the person to whom you're speaking to visualize that desired outcome. It enables them to visualize what their life would be like if the problem that they're facing was no longer there. And, as somebody, once said, people don't buy grass seeds, they buy beautiful lawns. And so the more that our stories are able to create that internal visualization of the beautiful lawn, they become very, very powerful tools. And that is, again, one of the benefits. But it's one of these things that you need to have prepared. And it can't be something where you say, okay, I'm going to use stories, and now I'll go make up stories when I'm on a sales call, because the reality winds up being that when you're on a sales call, as much as we intellectually know that we should flesh out problems and we should talk about benefits and we should really, really flesh all those things out, even though intellectually we understand that, the moment the prospect mentions any kind of problem they're facing, our natural tendency is to bring our solution bat out and just whack the poop out of the poor person.
Yep.
So we start just whacking away with, here's the 19,000 reasons why you ought to, hire me or buy my thing. And, then we're kind of amazed on why, why this prospect who, moments ago seemed interested now seems to be, fleeing out the door. So, the dynamic of when you're in a real life sales situation is so different than, when you're not in it. So the lesson that I've learned for myself and for my clients, and what I've tried to communicate in unique sales stories, is that preparation is key. And if you develop these stories, and if you have them prepared, and they are the arrows in the quiver, then you can bring them out, and then you're relaxed about it. Then they sound very conversational, very natural, and of course very effective.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree, and I call that, stage fright. And so many times, you deal with a lot of confident sales representatives, and they will freeze on a call. I've had to rescue my fair share of salespeople on a call because they just lost it. It's like standing in front of an audience and you're watching a play and the actor forgets their lines. You have to practice. You have to be prepared. You have to visualize the outcome of your sales call. There's no question about that. And to your point, Mark, you have to know these stories before you go in. You can't just do stand up and just all of a sudden come up with a story, because it might not fit the exact story unless you've rehearsed it. There's no question about that. You mentioned the 6 components of a unique sales story inside your book. Can you talk a little bit on how to craft your message, just get a high level to the listeners?
Yeah, I mean, if you're, we go obviously into this in a lot more detail, but if we look at it just kind of thematically, look at it from that 10,000-foot perspective, the good stories tend to have a number of components to them, and first, as you've mentioned, they focus on a particular problem. And so that's the kind of the starting point for developing the story, which is what is the problem someone is facing. But the second component is the consequences. And what consequences do is they elevate the problem. Because from a salesmanship standpoint, oftentimes we're selling something or we're trying to sell something, but we don't know if this is a big problem or a little problem. Is it a minor irritant or is it mission critical to fix it? So by talking about the consequences when we tell our story, now it becomes a bigger issue, and it starts to make the problem something that we can now understand why it needs to be solved. For example, when I was telling you the story about going to the networking group and Jim Brinkman, I incorporated in that story about the fact I had not gotten any referrals, I hadn't any business, money was running low, didn't really know if I was going to be able to make a success out of this entrepreneurial venture. Those are all the consequences of not figuring out the solution to the problem, which of course was not getting more referrals. So you want to incorporate the consequences. The next thing you want to think about are the options. And, there's seldom just one solution. And most of the time when we look at solutions, we look at a variety of different options. And so in a story, you may want to incorporate a discussion about the different options. Now, what this is this is a very sneaky way of discounting your competition. Because in this story, your character could have looked at a lot of different options, but then decided that those particular options weren't right for him or her, and these are the reasons why. And so what you've done there is you have, in effect, kind of killed your competition with kindness. Then the next step is the solution, which is, what is your solution? And when it comes time to discuss solutions, what is the easiest way for people to understand it is if you can divide it down into somewhere between 3 to 5 steps. Now, those numbers are kind of arbitrary. You could have 7, but you wouldn't want to have 15 steps because you just can't. You're just not going to be able to keep your listener engaged. But, somewhere around, that number, 3 to 5 steps. And if you walk the person through the steps, people will be nodding their head and they'll be able to understand and visualize what it is that you're going to be able to do for them. And then finally, the next step is the results, what exactly happens when people get, when they implement. For example, the story I told you about networking, it wrapped up with results, and where I went from, literally nothing, 0 referrals a month to 7 referrals, which, again, may not sound like a huge number, but, in my world, that was a dramatic leap. So you want to try to quantify it. And then the final part of the story is next steps. What is it that you want the person to do? Because, of course, in any kind of sales or any kind of marketing, we always want to be thinking about what's the next step in the system and what is it we want to try to get them to do. So in that particular case, if I had taken that story to its ultimate conclusion, I would have invited your listeners, which I will do now, to get a free copy of the book by going to uniquesalesstories.com. Now, they can go to Amazon or Borders and Barnes & Noble and buy it and pay me some money, and I'll be happy to receive that money. But if they would like to get a free copy, they can go to uniquesalesstories, that's plural.com, and they can get a free copy.
Well, that's very kind of you, Mark. Thank you very much, and I'm sure the listeners will take advantage of that as well. Well, we have to close down. I've definitely learned a lot with regards to unique sales stories, and I love the idea, and I'm a 100% believer in what you did, is because that's what people remember. Even years from years, and it's kind of funny, I'm sure you have these stories too, is years from when you actually provided service to a client, they remember the stories. They don't remember the content or what you solved for them. They just remember that, oh, remember the time you told me about this? And it's kind of funny how they remember the stories, and that's just understanding from a psychology point of view how people remember things, and it's so important to have these stories. And to your point, Mark, you don't want to come up with these stories on the fly. You have to prepare. I'm a big believer the difference in when I've received a sale and when I've lost a sale, I can go right back to it, and it's in the preparation. I was not prepared. And selling right now, you cannot go in cold anymore and just kind of pull the wool over their eyes. And if you're doing that, then you shouldn't be in sales anyways. But you need to provide service, you need to be prepared, and you need to create value. You tell a little bit more how the listeners can get a hold of you with your websites, and we'll close it out.
Right. Well, again, they can get the free copy of the book at uniquesalesstories.com, And if they'd like to learn more about Gentle Rain, please go to gentlerainmarketing.com. And there you can, there's a lot of free information about how to get consistent streams of brand new clients with no cold calling or hard selling. There's videos on the site. And you can also sign up there for my free weekly newsletter.
Oh, great. Well, thank you, Mark, so much for your time. I really enjoyed speaking with you. It's been a pleasure, and I know the listeners appreciate it as well. And I want to say thanks again, and I wish everyone good luck on their next sales call, and thank you. Have a great day now.